why don't we start with the book? Tell people, um, give people the quick overview, and then I've got a million questions.
For sure. So this is a project that I started about, gosh, 6 years ago at this point, 6, 7 years ago at this point. So I was an entrepreneur and kind of, seen the ups and downs. And there's thousands of companies, tens of thousands of companies that get started every year, and a lot of them get a lot of funding. But very few of them end up becoming successful multi-billion dollar outcomes. And I wanted to see, is there anything that's different between these two groups of companies that raise venture capital funding, but never get to be these big outcomes? A lot of them fail, and companies that do raise some venture capital funding and do become great outcomes and become companies like Facebooks of the world. um and, I looked around for a long time to see if there's ever been a data-driven empirical study on this. And it never was. There's nothing there. And the reason is, there's the data isn't readily available. And this is not, there's a lot of opinions and there's a lot of books written and there's a lot of, thoughts, but none of this is backed by data. And because the data is very, very hard to capture, you can, understand the name of these companies and how much funding they got, but, there isn't data on how many competitors each of these companies had when they started. There isn't data on what the exact market size was when they started. There isn't data on where the idea came from. You need to go through, lines and lines of, interviews and, go through a lot of work. So it took me 4 years to collect this data. And this is the largest data that's ever collected on startups. 30,000 data points, 65 data point per company, per startup company, for all the startups kind of in the period of time between 2005 and 2018. And I basically dig into 65 data points, but about the founders, about the company, about the fundraising, about the market, to try to understand, what does matter and what doesn't. And I also interviewed hundreds of founders, and I published some of the interviews with people like founders of Zoom, founders of PayPal, founders of GitHub, founders of Cloudflare, and a lot of, these big startups with interesting stories.
Yeah, no kidding. By the way, I love Eric Yuan. He was one of our earlier interviews starting this show,
Great.
and I was just so impressed with his like obsession for customers. I
Yes.
I feel like he's like on another level there.
100%. Yeah. The humility that he has, even after building one of the greatest, empires of SaaS. But the level of humility and the obsession with the customer is, I think, what sets him apart.
It was interesting when COVID hit to see. I don't know. I feel like Zoom won COVID, and in
Right.
certain ways, I wasn't that surprised because of how much he cared about the customers and it came through in their product. Um, and I always like to, for me, I always feel like, at least in Western society, we do it wrong, where we put the quote first and then we put who it was by second. I want to know who something was by before I want to know what they have to say, kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, like if it's by my brother-in-law, who I love my brother-in-law, but if it's by Warren Buffett, it's going to hold a little more water for me. And I want to know that ahead of time. So, before we dive more into the book, can you talk just a little bit about, the companies you started and just a little bit more about, well, let's start there. Why don't we start with the companies that you started and then I have more questions for you.
For sure. Yeah. So I'm originally from Tehran, Iran, and my journey. I was a scientist for a while. I thought I'm gonna, go become, get a PhD and become a scientist. For a while, I was, publishing a bunch of papers, and all I was doing is kind of doing machine learning, deep learning research on, the body signals and human computer interfaces. So, a lot of my time and early on went on into kind of doing things related to biosignals, brain computer interfaces, things that, are kind of in the center of attention now with what Elon Musk and Neuralink are doing. But I was doing these things about 12 years ago. Um, so that was kind of, that's where I learned the craft of the science and how to deal with statistics and how to collect data and how to run a study and run a proper academic study on something like this. Um, I had one of the kind of the first thing that project that I started was a fintech project. I started a app for trading stocks on the Iranian market on the Tehran Stock Exchange. That was kind of my first foray into the world of entrepreneurship and kind of learning the ropes. And then my second company was into the hardware ecosystem of building hardware for people in the industrial spaces, kind of critical hardware for people working in warehouses and factories. And then I came to the Bay Area, to Silicon Valley, and went to Stanford Business School, and then joined DCVC about 5 years ago. And we've grown a lot since I've joined. I mean, it was a small team back in the day. Now, we're a large team and managing over $3.5 billion for our LPs, and getting to about 20 unicorn companies, including three that I'm involved with.